I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. The text message arrived precisely at noon on my 65th birthday. I stared at my phone, watching the cheerful string of emojis dance across the screen like mocking little jesters. Mom, we're all boarded on the Royal Princess. Can't believe we're doing the Mediterranean this year. Kids are so excited. Sorry again about the timing. We really thought your birthday was next month. Senior moment on our part. Love you. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter of my modest apartment, the familiar ache blooming in my chest. This was the 5th consecutive year my family had accidentally scheduled their annual cruise during my birthday week. 5 years of carefully orchestrated forgetfulness. 5 years of sitting alone while scrolling through their photos of sunsets, exotic ports, and elaborate family dinners where every member was present except me. What would I say anyway? Actually, my birthday has been July 15th for 65 years now. Or perhaps, funny how you've had the same senior moment for 5 years running. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to my small balcony overlooking the park. Below, mothers pushed strollers and elderly couples walked hand in hand. Normal families. Families who remembered birthdays. My phone buzzed again. A text from James, my son. Heading out to sea. Mom, reception might be spotty. Mia said she told you about our trip. Sorry about missing your birthday again. Totally thought it was in August. We'll celebrate when we get back. Promise. August. My birthday had supposedly migrated from June to August over the years, somehow never landing in July where it actually belonged. The transparent lie should have made me angry. Instead, it just made me tired. I sipped my tea, watching a young family below. The mother was taking photos of her husband with their toddler on his shoulders, all of them laughing. I wondered if that young mother could possibly imagine a future where that beautiful child would pretend to forget her birthday just to avoid her company. The autumn leaves swirled around the park bench where an elderly man sat feeding pigeons. He reminded me of my father in his final years, gentle, patient, present, the very qualities my own children seemed to have forgotten. My phone rang, interrupting my increasingly melancholy thoughts. Not Mia or James. They were safely at sea now, beyond the reach of awkward conversations. But my lawyer, Patricia Wilson. Happy birthday, Deborah, she said when I answered. At least someone remembers, I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. How could I forget it's the day we officially execute Harold's final wishes? Patricia's voice softened. Are you ready for this? It's a big step. A year had passed since my Uncle Harold's death at 96. My father's eccentric brother had been the family outlier, the one who lived modestly despite his wealth, who valued experiences over possessions, who never quite fit into the achievement-oriented Taylor family mold. He was also the only one who'd visited regularly during my parents' long illnesses, who'd recognized the toll those 15 years of caregiving had taken on me, while my husband Richard had eventually left, unable to cope with being second priority, and my children had drifted into their own busy lives. Uncle Harold had shown up, every Thursday afternoon, without fail. He'd arrived with pastries from the bakery and stories to share while I played his favorite classical pieces on the piano. 5 years ago, when they planned the first cruise coinciding with my birthday, I'd been genuinely surprised and hurt. I'd just lost my father, the second parent I'd nursed through years of debilitating illness, and had hoped my newly empty schedule meant more time with my children and grandchildren. I'd imagined family dinners, weekend visits, perhaps even a small celebration for my birthday. Instead, I'd received excited calls about their upcoming family cruise. One nobody had thought to invite me on. When I gently pointed out the dates overlapped with my birthday, the backpedaling was immediate and uncomfortable. Oh, Mom, we had no idea, Mia had said, voice thick with practiced concern. But everything's already booked, non-refundable. You understand, right? I had understood more than they realized. The next year, when it happened again, I'd been more direct. The cruise is scheduled over my birthday again. Is it really? James had sounded genuinely surprised. I could have sworn your birthday was in June. By the 3rd year, I'd stopped mentioning it altogether. What was the point? My children had made it clear that their lives were more convenient without me in them. At least not in any meaningful way. I was useful for emergency babysitting, for lending money that was never repaid, for listening to their problems. But actual inclusion, that was reserved for people who fit their carefully curated image of success. For 15 years, I'd put everyone else first. I'd abandoned my dreams of opening a music school to become a full-time caregiver. I'd watched my marriage crumble and my relationship with my children deteriorate while I changed bedpans and administered medications and held my mother's hand when she could no longer remember my name. I'd done it all without complaint because that's what love meant to me. Showing up, being present, sacrificing when necessary. But standing in my empty apartment on my 65th birthday with my children once again at sea, both literally and figuratively, I finally understood what Uncle Harold had been trying to tell me for years. Sacrifice without limits isn't nobility, it's self-erasure. I picked up my phone and looked at the cruise photos already appearing on my children's social media accounts. The entire family, Mia and Daniel with their 2 teenagers, James and Olivia with their 3 children, even my ex-husband Richard and his new wife, all smiling on the deck of a luxury liner. Having the time of our lives, the caption read. Complete family vacation. Complete. The word stung more than it should have after all this time. I'm ready, I told Patricia on the phone, my voice steadier than I expected. The papers are all signed, the funds have been transferred, and I've maintained the secrecy as requested. I laughed softly. Not difficult when your family barely speaks to you except when they need something. Harold's will had been clear. His substantial fortune would go entirely to me, with the condition that I tell no one about the inheritance for 1 full year. Watch who values you for yourself, not for what you can give them, he'd written in his final letter to me. Then and only then decide who deserves to share in your good fortune. The year of observation had been enlightening, to say the least. My children's pattern of selective attention had only become more pronounced. They called when they needed money for temporary financial emergencies. They dropped off my grandchildren without notice when their childcare fell through. They remembered my existence on major holidays, usually with hasty visits that felt more obligatory than affectionate. Not once during that year did either of them call just to check how I was doing, or invite me to an event that wasn't serving their needs in some way. The closing is at 2:00, Patricia reminded me. I'll meet you at the property. And Deborah, for what it's worth, I think Harold would be proud of how you're honoring his wishes. After hanging up, I looked around my small apartment, the place I'd moved to after selling the family home to pay for my parents' medical care. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through them. The carpet was worn in pathways to the kitchen and bathroom. The furniture was functional but dated. Pieces I'd kept from the family home because they were practical, not because they brought me joy. For decades, I'd lived my life according to what was practical, what was needed, what was expected. Today, on my 65th birthday, I was finally going to give myself the gift I deserved most, a life that centered my own happiness for a change. As I closed my apartment door behind me, I felt something unexpected, not sadness or resentment, but a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. The lightness of possibilities, the lightness of freedom. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was putting myself first. And it felt revolutionary. The coastal road to Seacliff was breathtaking, winding paths overlooking the Atlantic, charming villages nestled between rolling hills, the July sun casting diamonds across the water. Under different circumstances, I might have stopped to admire the view. Today, however, my focus remained fixed on the destination. Patricia was already waiting when I pulled into the private drive, her sensible sedan looking somewhat out of place among the manicured grounds. She stepped out as I approached, portfolio in hand, her practical pantsuit a stark contrast to the grandeur surrounding us. "It's even more beautiful in person," she commented as I joined her. The photos didn't do it justice. I gazed up at the house, my house as of 2 today. 3 stories of elegant New England architecture with weathered gray shingles, white trim, and a wraparound porch that offered panoramic ocean views. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon sunlight, giving the impression the entire structure was somehow illuminated from within. "Ocean glass," I murmured. naming the property for the first time out loud. Pardon, that's what I'm calling it. Ocean glass. I smiled at Patricia's questioning look. Uncle Harold and I used to collect sea glass on the beach when I was young. He said it was ordinary broken glass transformed by time and the sea into something precious. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. An apt metaphor. The interior exceeded even my expectations. Soaring ceilings, walls of windows capturing the ocean views, warm wooden floors that echoed pleasantly beneath our footsteps. The previous owners had renovated with respect for the home's 1920s origins while incorporating modern luxuries, a chef's kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, bathrooms with heated floors and rainfall showers, a wine cellar, a library with built-in bookshelves reaching to the ceiling. "The closing documents need your signature," Patricia said, leading me to the kitchen island where she'd arranged the paperwork. "Everything else has been processed. The funds have been transferred as directed." I signed where indicated, the scratch of the pen against paper seeming impossibly loud in the cavernous kitchen. With each signature, the reality of my situation became more concrete. I, Deborah Taylor, former music teacher and lifelong caretaker, now owned this magnificent property outright. No mortgage, no debt, just mine. "And this," Patricia said when I'd finished, handing me a set of keys, "makes it official. Congratulations." Deborah, the keys felt substantial in my palm. Solid brass with an antique patina befitting the home's historic character. I closed my fingers around them, the metal warming against my skin. "There's one more thing," Patricia added, reaching into her portfolio. "Harold left specific instructions that this was to be given to you today, along with the property transfer." She handed me a sealed envelope, my name written across the front in Uncle Harold's distinctive cursive, elegant yet slightly tremulous from age. My throat tightened at the sight of his handwriting. "I'll give you some privacy," Patricia said kindly. "I need to make some calls anyway. Take your time." After she stepped onto the porch, I settled into a window seat overlooking the private beach below and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of Harold's personal stationery and a smaller envelope. "My dearest Deborah, if you're reading this, then a year has passed since my departure, and you are now sitting in your new home. Yes, your home. Not a family estate to be shared, not a responsibility to bear for others, but a sanctuary that belongs solely to you. For too long, I've watched you give everything to those who take your generosity for granted, your parents, while deserving of care, consumed 15 years of your life. Your husband lacked the character to weather difficult times. Your children, I'm sorry to say, inherited neither your selflessness nor your quiet strength. This house represents what I wish I could have given you sooner: freedom. Freedom from obligation. Freedom from others' expectations. Freedom to discover who Deborah might be when she isn't defined by what she does for everyone else." In the smaller envelope, you'll find one last gift, something I've held in trust since you were a young woman with dreams you set aside too easily. It's time to reclaim them. All my love. Uncle Harold P.E.S. Happy birthday, my dear. Finally, a celebration worthy of you. Tears blurred my vision as I opened the second envelope. Inside was a faded newspaper clipping from nearly 40 years ago. A review of a piano recital I'd given at the conservatory before I'd met Richard. Before my parents' illnesses. Before life had intervened. The reviewer had praised my remarkable sensitivity and promising future as both performer and educator. Paper-clipped to the yellowed clipping was a bank statement for an account I'd never known existed, showing regular deposits made over decades. The most recent balance, $250,000. A note in Harold's handwriting was attached. "Your music school fund. Started the day you played Chopin for me and mentioned your dream of teaching children who couldn't afford lessons. It's never too late to begin." Deborah, I pressed the papers to my chest, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to name. Grief for the years lost. Gratitude for Harold's unwavering belief in me. Anger at my family's casual dismissal, and underneath it all, a strange, bubbling excitement I barely recognized, the sensation of possibilities unfolding. When Patricia returned, she found me still sitting in the window seat, the letter in my lap, gazing out at the ocean. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. I'm not sure yet, I answered honestly, but I think I will be. After Patricia left, I wandered through the rooms of my new home in solitary exploration. Each space seemed to offer its own invitation. The sunroom that would be perfect for a grand piano, the guest bedrooms awaiting visitors who truly wanted to be there, the sprawling kitchen where I could finally pursue my interest in cooking without having to accommodate everyone else's preferences. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, I found myself drawn to the master bedroom suite. Unlike the rest of his house, this room faced west, promising spectacular sunset views. The previous owners had left a chaise lounge perfectly positioned before the windows. I sank into it, watching the sky transform from blue to gold to fiery orange. On the table beside me, my phone buzzed with a notification. Another photo from the cruise. This one showing my 4 grandchildren making silly faces at the ship's ice cream bar. I felt the familiar pang of exclusion, but something was different this time. The pain was there, but alongside it was a new emotion. Resolve. Not bitterness, not the desire for revenge, but a clear-eyed determination to create a life of my own making. I picked up my phone and opened the camera app, angling it carefully to capture both my face and the spectacular sunset view behind me. I took a selfie, something I'd never done before. The resulting image surprised me. A woman with silver-streaked auburn hair and clear eyes, backlit by golden light, looking not old but sage, experienced, perhaps even beautiful in her own way. Before I could overthink it, I posted the photo to my rarely used social media account with a simple caption celebrating 65 years in my new home, #oceanglass, #birthday gift, #new beginnings. Then I set the phone aside, turned off the ringer, and continued watching the sunset, my first in a home that was truly mine. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant sound of waves. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't place where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The closing, Harold's letter, my impulsive social media post, my phone. I reached for it on the nightstand, curious whether anyone had noticed my understated announcement. The screen showed 97 missed calls, 43 voicemails, and over 100 text messages. Most were from Mia and James, with a healthy sprinkling from their spouses and even my ex-husband. The timestamps told their own story, beginning with casual confusion around 8:00 p.m. Mom, whose house is that? Escalating to concern by 9:00 p.m. Are you house-sitting for someone? Shifting to alarm by 10:00 p.m. Call us immediately, and finally arriving at barely concealed panic after midnight. Mom, this isn't funny. We're trying to enjoy our vacation. Please call. I scrolled through the texts, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. After years of having my birthday forgotten, my absence ignored, my needs dismissed, the sudden desperate need for my attention felt almost comical. The most recent message had arrived just 20 minutes ago from Mia. Getting off ship at next port. Booking flight home. Please tell us you're okay. Where did you get a house? I set the phone down without responding. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about what they might have missed and what it might mean for them. After a simple breakfast on the porch, watching seagulls wheel above the waves, I decided to explore the grounds. The property encompassed 3 acres, including a private beach accessible by a winding path from the main house. Gardens that had clearly once been meticulously planned had grown slightly wild with neglect, not overgrown, but softened, less rigidly controlled. I found I preferred them this way. At the far end of the property stood a charming cottage I hadn't noticed during yesterday's tour. Approximately 800 square feet, it featured the same weathered shingles and white trim as the main house, but on a much smaller scale. Through the windows, I could see it had been converted into a studio space, empty now, but with good light and built-in shelving along one wall. I was contemplating potential uses for the space when my phone rang again. Instead of Mia or James, the caller ID displayed Daniel Roberts, my son-in-law, Mia's husband. I hesitated, then answered. Hello, Daniel. Deborah. His voice carried its usual smooth salesman's cadence, though pitched slightly higher with tension. Thank God. We've been trying to reach you for hours. I was sleeping, I replied calmly. It's a big house. Lots of exploring to do. I was tired. About that house. He shifted gears instantly, the concerned tone giving way to professional interest. Spectacular property, oceanfront and sea cliff. Right must be worth med. Is Mia with you? I interrupted, not interested in his appraisal. She's booking flights. We're cutting the cruise short. Everyone's worried sick. Everyone was enjoying their family vacation quite happily until I posted a photo, I observed. No one was worried about me spending my birthday alone. Again. A beat of silence followed this direct statement. Daniel recovered quickly. Look, Deborah, you know how it is with schedules and the kids' activities. We've always meant to be better about your birthday. But it's been conveniently scheduled over by the family cruise for 5 consecutive years, I finished for him. Please don't insult my intelligence. Daniel, it doesn't suit either of us. Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something more calculated. So, this house, it's quite a surprise. A wonderful one, of course. Is this some kind of inheritance situation or a timeshare? Mia mentioned your Uncle Harold passed away last year. Was there some kind of delayed settlement? There it was. The real reason for his call. Not concern, but calculation. Please tell Mia not to interrupt her vacation on my account, I said, ignoring his questions entirely. I'm perfectly fine. Better than fine. Actually. But the house is mine, I stated simply. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some unpacking to do. I ended the call before he could respond, then immediately silenced my phone as it began ringing again. They could wait. For once in my life, they would have to wait for me. The next 3 days passed in a blur of small pleasures and quiet discoveries. I arranged for movers to bring my modest belongings from the apartment. I explored every room of my new home, making mental notes about changes I might make. I walked the beach each morning, collecting pieces of sea glass that I arranged in a crystal bowl on the coffee table. On the 4th day, the inevitable confrontation arrived, heralded by the sound of tires on gravel and car doors slamming in quick succession. From my position on the porch, I watched as 2 vehicles disgorged their occupants. Mia and Daniel from a rental car, James and Olivia from what appeared to be an airport taxi. All 4 looked rumpled and irritated, dragging rolling suitcases behind them like reluctant pets. "Mom," Mia called, spotting me immediately. "What is going on? We've been worried sick." I remained seated, one hand resting on the open book in my lap. As I told Daniel, there was no need to interrupt your vacation. I'm perfectly fine. They mounted the porch steps as a unit, a wall of demand and expectation. Fine, James's voice rose incredulously. You post a picture of yourself in a mansion none of us has ever seen. Ignore our calls for days, and we're supposed to think everything's fine. I silenced my phone because I wanted some peace, I explained calmly. Something I rarely get to experience. Olivia, ever the social media influencer, was already taking surreptitious photos of the house with her phone. "This place is insane," she murmured. "The light is incredible." "Mom!" Mia stepped forward, her expression a practiced blend of concern and authority, the same look she'd used when recommending assisted living facilities for my parents years ago. "We need to understand what's happening. Where did this house come from? Are you in some kind of trouble?" I marked my place in my book and set it aside, taking my time before answering. The house came from a real estate transaction. I bought it with my money. And no, I'm not in any kind of trouble. Bought it? Daniel couldn't contain himself. "Deborah, this property has to be worth at least I know exactly what it's worth," I interrupted. "I paid for it." "But how?" James demanded. "Your teacher's pension couldn't possibly. I received an inheritance," I said simply, "from Uncle Harold." 4 pairs of eyes widened simultaneously. "Uncle Harold left you money." Mia sounded genuinely shocked. "That weird old man who used to make you play piano for him." The dismissive description of the one person who had truly seen me during my darkest years ignited something protective within me. That weird old man was more family to me than most of my actual family has been. He visited every week while I cared for your grandparents. He remembered every birthday. And yes, he left me his estate. All of it. All of it, Daniel repeated, dollar signs practically visible in his eyes. And how much was that exactly? I met his gaze steadily. Enough to buy this house outright. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to pursue some dreams I set aside decades ago. But why didn't you tell us? Mia asked, a hint of hurt finally breaking through her authoritative facade. Harold's will had conditions, I explained. I wasn't to tell anyone about the inheritance for 1 full year. He wanted me to see who valued me for myself, not for what I could give them. The implication hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. No one spoke for several long moments. Finally, James broke the silence. So, all this buying this massive house, posting that photo, it was some kind of test to punish us for the cruise. No, I said quietly. It wasn't a test or a punishment. It was a choice. My choice. For once, I chose myself. I stood then, smoothing down my linen pants with steady hands. Now, would any of you like some iced tea? It's quite warm today, and you've had a long journey for what I suspect will be a very short visit. The look of collective bewilderment on their faces was answer enough. We had reached uncharted territory in our family dynamics, and none of them quite knew how to navigate these new waters. Neither did I, if I was being honest, but for the first time in decades, I wasn't adjusting my course to accommodate everyone else's journey. I was charting my own path, and they could either find a way to follow respectfully or watch from a distance. The choice, for once, would be entirely theirs. So, let me get this straight. James paced the living room, his voice tight with controlled frustration. For a whole year, you've been sitting on a fortune, living in that tiny apartment, accepting our help with groceries and bills. I never asked for your help, I interjected calmly. You occasionally brought groceries during your twice-yearly visits. Mia paid my internet bill for 3 months after claiming it would be easier to bundle it with hers. That's hardly extensive financial support. We'd moved our uncomfortable reunion indoors when it became clear this conversation would not be brief. I'd served the promised iced tea along with some fresh fruit I'd purchased at the local farmer's market. None of them had touched the refreshments. That's not the point. Mom, Mia leaned forward from her perch on my new sofa. You deliberately kept us in the dark about something that affects the whole family. How exactly does my inheritance affect you? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Well, it's family money, she stammered. Uncle Harold was Dad's uncle. That makes it family money. Harold wasn't related to any of you by blood, I pointed out. He was my uncle by marriage, and he chose to leave his estate to me, not to the family, to me specifically. Daniel, who had been suspiciously quiet while mentally calculating figures, finally spoke up. Deborah, surely you understand our concern. A sudden windfall like this requires careful management, investment strategies, tax planning, asset protection. These are complex matters, all of which I've addressed with qualified financial advisors, I replied. The same ones Harold trusted for decades. But we could have helped, James exclaimed, throwing his hands up in exasperation. God, Mom, I'm a financial analyst. Daniel is in real estate. We have expertise. Yes, you do, I acknowledged. And if I had told you about the inheritance immediately, what would you have recommended I do with it? James looked momentarily thrown by the direct question. Well, obviously a diversified portfolio, some safe investments, maybe a small property, certainly not all of it tied up in a single luxury asset like this place. And would any of your recommendations have prioritized what I wanted? I asked softly. Or would they have focused on what made the most financial sense for the future? Perhaps with considerations for how it might eventually benefit your children. His silence was answer enough. Olivia, who had been alternating between surreptitiously photographing my living room and texting rapidly on her phone, finally looked up. I don't understand why this has to be so adversarial. This should be exciting. We're just surprised. That's all. Her smile was practiced, camera ready. Think of the family gatherings we could have here. The holidays, the summer breaks. This place is perfect for entertaining. I didn't buy this house to entertain, I said. Then why did you buy it? Mia demanded, frustration evident in her tone. It's absurdly large for one person. I took a slow sip of my tea before answering, considering how to explain something I was still discovering myself. I bought it because for the first time in my adult life, I could choose something simply because I wanted it. I finally said, not because it was practical or economical or convenient for everyone else, just because it spoke to me. That seems selfish, Mia said, though she had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at her own words. Yes, I agreed simply. It is selfish, after spending 15 years caring for your grandparents, sacrificing my career, my marriage, and apparently my place in my children's lives. I decided to do something completely, unabashedly selfish. A heavy silence followed this statement. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Daniel suddenly checking his watch. Look, James finally said, his tone shifting to something more conciliatory. We're all tired from the emergency travel. Emotions are running high. Maybe we should continue this discussion tomorrow after everyone's had some rest. That sounds reasonable, I agreed. There's a lovely inn in the village just 5 minutes down the road. I'm sure they can accommodate you. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on me with varying degrees of shock. You want us to stay at an inn? Mia's voice rose incredulously. Mom, this house must have, 6 bedrooms? 7, actually, I corrected her. But they're not ready for guests yet. I haven't purchased additional bedding or towels. This was not entirely true. The house had come fully furnished, including perfectly adequate guest supplies, but after a lifetime of automatic accommodation, of squeezing myself smaller to make room for everyone else's needs and preferences, I found I was unwilling to surrender my peaceful sanctuary so quickly. You can't be serious, James scoffed. We flew across the ocean because we thought you were in trouble, and now you're sending us to a hotel. An inn, I corrected gently. A very charming one, and I specifically told Daniel not to interrupt your vacation. That was your choice. Olivia stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. James, let's just go. Clearly, your mother wants her space. The word space hung in the air like an accusation, as if my desire for it was both novel and unreasonable. Fine. Mia gathered her purse, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. We'll get rooms at the inn, but this conversation isn't over. Mom, there are serious matters we need to discuss. I walked them to the door, maintaining a calm exterior despite the emotional turbulence beneath. As they filed out, Daniel lingered behind, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Deborah, while the others get settled, perhaps you and I could have a private conversation about the property. I have some connections who would be very interested if you ever considered selling, and I could ensure you get top dollar. I won't be selling, Daniel, I interrupted firmly. Not now, not ever. This is my home. His smile tightened. Well, never say never. Real estate is all about timing, and goodbye, Daniel, I said, holding the door pointedly. I'll see you all tomorrow. Shall we say brunch at 11? After they left, the house seemed to exhale with me, the rooms expanding back into peaceful spaciousness. I wandered onto the porch, watching their cars disappear down the long driveway. Part of me felt guilty for enforcing this boundary. The old Deborah would have scrambled to make up guest rooms, would have apologized for the inconvenience, would have cooked an elaborate dinner while everyone else relaxed. The old Deborah would have shrunk herself to make space for their outsized reactions. But the woman who stood on this porch watching the sunset paint the ocean gold was discovering she preferred having room to stretch. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. How did the grand reveal go? I typed back. About as expected. They're staying at the Sea Cliff Inn tonight, coming back tomorrow for serious discussions. Her response came quickly. Remember what we talked about. You don't owe them explanations or access. This is your inheritance, not family money. I smiled at her protectiveness. Patricia had become something of a friend over the past year, one of the few people who understood the complexity of my situation. I know, I replied. For once, I'm standing my ground. As I settled into the porch swing with a glass of wine, watching the first stars appear above the darkening ocean, I realized something surprising. Despite the confrontation, despite the tension still to come, I felt curiously peaceful. The boundaries I'd drawn today might seem small to some, declining to host unexpected visitors, maintaining privacy about my finances, but for me, they represented a seismic shift. For the first time in my life, I'd prioritized my own comfort over others' expectations. And while it hadn't been easy, it also hadn't been nearly as impossible as I'd always feared. The woman I was becoming might take some getting used to. For my family, certainly, but perhaps for me as well. But sitting there in the gathering dusk, listening to the rhythmic sound of waves against the shore, I found I rather liked her already. They arrived at 10:45 the next morning, 15 minutes early for our scheduled brunch. A tactical move I recognized immediately. Mia had always believed arriving ahead of schedule gave her an advantage in negotiations, a small power play to keep others off balance. I was prepared. The patio table was already set with linen napkins, fresh flowers, and a light spread of quiche, fruit, and pastries from the local bakery. I'd made coffee and was sipping a cup while reading the newspaper when I heard their cars on the gravel drive. "You're early," I observed pleasantly as they mounted the patio steps. "Coffee's ready if anyone would like some." Their coordinated outfits hadn't escaped my notice. Mia and James both in business casual attire, as if arriving for a board meeting rather than a family brunch. Daniel wore what I recognized as his closing the deal ensemble, and Olivia had opted for a camera-ready sundress, clearly anticipating photo opportunities. "We wanted to get an early start," James said, pulling out a chair for Olivia before seating himself. "There's a lot to discuss. Is there?" I poured coffee for those who indicated they wanted some. I thought I explained everything fairly clearly yesterday. Mia extracted a sleek leather portfolio from her bag. "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's important to establish some clarity about this situation for everyone's benefit." "I'm listening," I said, passing the pastry basket to Daniel, who absently took a croissant while keeping his eyes fixed on Mia's portfolio. She opened it to reveal neatly printed documents and what appeared to be spreadsheets. Of course, they'd spent the evening preparing presentations rather than reflecting on our relationship. "First," she began in her boardroom voice, "we want to acknowledge that Uncle Harold's bequest was his decision, and legally the money is yours to manage." "How generous of you to acknowledge the law," I murmured, taking a bite of quiche. Mia's lips tightened, but she continued. "However, we believe that ethically this represents a family inheritance. Uncle Harold had no children of his own. Dad was his closest blood relative, which means by extension, James and I and our children are his family line. Harold was related to your father by marriage, not blood," I corrected gently. "He was my uncle, not yours, and he made his wishes explicitly clear." "Regardless," James cut in, "we think it makes sense to approach this as a family matter. We've drafted a proposal for how the inheritance could be structured to benefit everyone while still giving you the security and comfort you deserve." Daniel nodded encouragingly. "It's a win-win. Deborah, you maintain lifetime use of this property while we establish trusts for the grandchildren's education and set aside capital for family investments." I took a sip of coffee, using the moment to gather my thoughts. "May I ask why you assume I haven't already made provisions for my grandchildren?" This question seemed to catch them off guard. "Have you?" Mia asked, unable to hide her surprise. "I've established education trusts for each of the 5 grandchildren," I confirmed. "They'll be well provided for." That's good," James stammered, clearly recalibrating. "But there are other considerations, tax implications, estate planning, long-term investment strategies, all addressed with Harold's financial team," I interrupted smoothly. "They've been managing these assets for decades with excellent returns." Mia flipped to another page in her portfolio. "Mom, with all due respect, you're not financially sophisticated. You were a piano teacher. These matters require expertise." The casual dismissal of my intelligence stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "I've spent the past year educating myself about investment strategies, tax codes, and estate planning. I may have taught piano, Mia, but I'm not incapable of learning." "No one's saying you're incapable," Daniel interjected with his salesman's smile. "But wouldn't you rather enjoy your retirement than worry about managing a complex estate? Let us handle the burden." "That's very considerate," I replied. "But I don't consider it a burden. In fact, I found I have quite a knack for financial management. Harold's advisors have been quite impressed. I could almost see the tactical shift happening behind their eyes, the realization that appealing to my supposed incompetence wasn't working. Mom, James leaned forward, switching to a more emotional approach. This isn't just about money, it's about family legacy. Uncle Harold's estate should benefit future generations of Taylors. Surely that's what he would have wanted. If that's what he had wanted, I said quietly, that's what he would have specified in his will. Instead, he left everything to me, with a letter explicitly stating that I should use it to build the life I'd sacrificed for others. But why the secrecy? Mia demanded, frustration breaking through her professional veneer. Why hide it from us for a whole year? I set down my coffee cup and looked directly at my daughter. Harold wanted me to see who valued me for myself, not for what I could provide. He believed a year of observation would make that clear. The implication hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. That's not fair, Mia's voice wavered. We've been busy with our own lives, our careers, our children. Just because we couldn't visit as often as you might have liked. When was the last time either of you called just to check how I was doing? I asked softly. Not to ask for babysitting, not to borrow money, not to complain about your spouses or children or jobs, just to see how I was. Silence fell over the table. That's what I thought, I continued after a moment. And that's fine. People grow apart. Children build their own lives. I understand that. Stand. But please don't sit at my table and pretend you're entitled to my inheritance when you couldn't even remember my birthday for 5 consecutive years. The cruise dates were coincidental, James protested, but his eyes slid away from mine as he spoke. 5 years of coincidence. I raised an eyebrow. Remarkable odds. Olivia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. I think we're getting off track here. Obviously, there are some hurt feelings to address, but right now we should focus on practical matters. She turned to me with her influencer smile, the one she used in sponsored content. Deborah, we're thinking of the family's best interests. James and Mia have children to consider. College isn't getting any cheaper, and this property, she gestured expansively at the ocean view, is a significant asset that should benefit multiple generations. You're right about one thing, I agreed. College isn't getting any cheaper. That's why I've already established those education trusts I mentioned. Each grandchild will have their tuition fully covered at the institution of their choice. That's very generous, Daniel conceded, though his tone suggested he was still calculating what else might be available. It's what Harold would have wanted, I said simply. He valued education highly. But this house is not part of that provision. This house is mine, and mine alone. Mia closed her portfolio with a sharp snap. So that's it. You get everything, and we're supposed to just accept that? Yes, I replied calmly. That's exactly what you're supposed to do, because it's not about getting anything. It's about respecting Harold's wishes and my autonomy. This isn't like you, Mom, James said, frustration evident in his voice. You've always put family first. Always. I put family first for decades, I corrected him. I sacrificed my career, my marriage, and my dreams to care for your grandparents. I supported all of you emotionally and financially whenever you needed it. I've been putting everyone else first my entire adult life. I looked around the table at their uncomfortable expressions. Now, at 65, I'm finally putting myself first. And if that seems selfish to you, then perhaps you need to reconsider your definition of the word. Silence settled over the table, broken only by the distant sound of waves and the call of seagulls overhead. The carefully prepared arguments had crumbled in the face of simple truth. They weren't entitled to anything. And they knew it. Daniel was the first to recover, switching tactics with the smooth adaptability that made him successful in sales. Well, Deborah, we certainly respect your position, and this is a stunning property. Perhaps we could discuss visitation arrangements, holiday gatherings, summer visits with the grandchildren. I'd love to see more of my grandchildren, I said honestly. But visits will need to be planned in advance, by invitation. This is my home, not a vacation timeshare. The message was clear. The open-door policy of my previous life, where family could drop in unannounced, disrupt my schedule, and expect accommodation, was over. The brunch ended shortly thereafter with promises to talk more later and awkward hugs that felt more obligatory than affectionate. As they prepared to leave, Mia lingered behind while the others headed to their cars. "Mom," she began, her voice softer than it had been during the negotiations. "Are you really happy here, all alone in this big house?" The question caught me by surprise, not because it was unexpected, but because it was the first hint of genuine concern any of them had shown for my well-being rather than my assets. "I'm discovering what happiness means for me," I answered truthfully. "After decades of defining myself through service to others, I'm learning who Deborah is when she stands alone." Mia nodded slowly, a flicker of something like understanding crossing her face. "I guess I never really thought about what you gave up for Grandma and Grandpa. For all of us." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." She flinched slightly at the unvarnished truth, but didn't argue. "I should catch up with James. We have a flight back this evening." "Safe travels," I said, walking her to the door. As I watched their cars disappear down the driveway, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and relief. The confrontation I dreaded was over, at least for now. I had held my ground. I had maintained my boundaries. And while I hadn't miraculously repaired decades of neglect and misunderstanding, I had perhaps planted seeds for a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than expectation and obligation. Whether those seeds would grow remained to be seen, but for the first time, I was prepared to wait and watch from a position of strength rather than need. The house felt particularly quiet after they left, not an uncomfortable silence, rather a peaceful absence of tension that allowed the natural sounds to emerge. Waves against the shore, wind through open windows, the occasional call of shorebirds. I spent the afternoon tidying away the remnants of brunch and walking the grounds, mentally planning gardens I might plant in the coming seasons. It wasn't until evening that I finally checked my phone. Alongside predictable messages from my children, "We need to continue this conversation," from Mia. "Call me when you've had time to think," from James. There was an unexpected text from my 14-year-old granddaughter, Sophie. "Grandma, is it true you bought a mansion by the ocean? Dad's super mad, but it sounds awesome. Can I come see it sometime?" Sophie had always been different from the rest of the family, quieter, more observant, with a love of books and music that reminded me of myself at her age. While her parents pushed her toward resume-building activities and social connections, Sophie preferred solitary pursuits, reading, sketching, playing the piano I'd given her for her 10th birthday. I smiled as I typed my response. "Yes, it's true, and I'd love for you to visit. Maybe we could arrange something for the end of summer." Her reply came almost immediately. "Really, that would be amazing. I could help you decorate and stuff. Dad says the house is way too big for one person." I could almost hear the teenage enthusiasm through the screen, so different from her parents' calculating assessment of my property. "It is a big house," I acknowledged. "Plenty of room for guests who are actually invited." A series of laughing emojis followed. "Oh snap, Grandma Dad said you were being weird and difficult, but I think you're just being badass." I laughed out loud at that, both at Sophie's assessment and at the image of James describing me as weird and difficult to his children. How quickly the narrative was being reshaped. "Language, young lady," I texted back, though I couldn't help adding a winking emoji. "But thank you for the vote of confidence." Our brief exchange lifted my spirits, a reminder that family connections could exist outside the web of obligation and inheritance that had dominated yesterday's discussions. Sophie saw me as a person, not just a resource or a responsibility. Perhaps there was hope for genuine relationships after all. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. After breakfast on the porch, I drove into the village to explore my new community properly. Seacliff was everything a New England coastal town should be, charming without being precious, historic without feeling trapped in amber. Locally owned shops lined the main street, from a bookstore with reading nooks visible through the window to a bakery whose aromas stopped me in my tracks. Inside the bakery, I found myself in conversation with the owner, a woman about my age named Grace Bennett, who had inherited the business from her parents and expanded it over the decades. "You must be the new owner of the old Whitaker place," she said as she wrapped up the sourdough loaf I'd selected. "Word travels fast in small towns." "I am," I confirmed. "Deborah Taylor. Well, Deborah Taylor. Welcome to Seacliff." She added a small package of cookies to my order. "On the house? Welcoming gift?" The simple kindness caught me off guard. "That's very generous." Grace waved away my thanks. "Not at all. It's nice to see the Whitaker house occupied again. Been sitting empty too long since the old man passed. You family. No relation," I explained. "Just fell in love with the property." She nodded approvingly. "Best reason to buy a house. Not for investment or status, for love." As I continued my explorations, I discovered a community center offering various classes and activities. A flyer in the window caught my eye. "Wanted piano instructor for children's after-school program. Inquire within." Before I could overthink it, I found myself pushing open the door and introducing myself to the center's director, a warm-eyed woman named Diane Matthews, who lit up when I mentioned my 40 years of teaching experience. "You're an absolute godsend," she declared after a brief conversation about my background. "Our previous instructor moved to Boston last month, and we have 15 students with no teacher. Could you possibly consider taking a few of them?" "I don't need payment," I interrupted, surprising myself with the words even as I spoke them. "In fact, I'd like to discuss something more substantial than just a few lessons." By the time I left the center an hour later, I had committed to not only teaching the existing students, but also establishing a scholarship program for children who couldn't afford lessons. Harold's Music School Fund would finally serve its intended purpose. Not as I'd once envisioned with my own dedicated facility, but through an existing community program with immediate needs. It felt right, more than right. It felt like fulfilling a promise made long ago, both to Harold and to my younger self. The days that followed settled into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching the ocean through changing light. I explored different parts of my property each day, making notes about improvements I might make. I visited the community center to set up my teaching schedule, which would begin in September. In the evenings, I rediscovered the simple pleasure of playing piano for myself, not performing for others or teaching techniques, but simply enjoying the music. The previous owners had left behind a Baldwin Grand in the sunroom, and after having it tuned, I found myself drawn to it nightly, working through pieces I hadn't played in years. It was during one of these evening sessions, my fingers moving through a Chopin nocturne as the setting sun painted the room gold, that my phone rang with an unknown local number. "Miss Taylor, this is Paul Wilson from the Seacliff Community Foundation." The last name gave me pause. "Any relation to Harold Wilson?" "His nephew," the man confirmed. "Second nephew. Technically, I understand you were close to my great-uncle." "I was," I said cautiously, wondering if another relative had emerged to challenge the inheritance. "I'm calling because we received your donation to the Children's Food Security Program this morning. It's extraordinarily generous." "Ah, that." In the excitement of establishing the music scholarship, I'd almost forgotten about the other commitment I'd made: a substantial donation to the Foundation's program providing meals to local children facing food insecurity. "Harold always believed in taking care of the community," I explained. "Especially children." "He did," Paul agreed, his voice warm with memory. "That's actually why I'm calling. We'd like to invite you to join our board. We need people with both resources and genuine compassion. From what I've seen, you have both." The invitation was unexpected but oddly fitting, another way to honor Harold's legacy while establishing my own place in this new community. "I'd be honored," I told him. "Though I should warn you, I'm just settling in. I may have a lot to learn about local needs." "Fresh perspectives are valuable," Paul assured me. "Our next meeting is Thursday evening. Nothing formal. We gather at Grace's Bakery after hours. Would you be able to join us?" After ending the call, I sat at the piano for a long time without playing, watching twilight settle over the garden. In just a few short weeks, my quiet existence had expanded in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I had commitments again, but ones I had chosen freely. I had connections forming, but based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "We need to discuss the holidays. Family tradition is important." I set the phone aside without responding. Family was indeed important, but I was learning that family could be defined in many ways, and traditions, like everything else in life, could change when they no longer served their purpose. The Chopin nocturne resumed under my fingers, floating through the rooms of my home like a blessing, like a promise of what was yet to come. August slipped into September with the subtle shifts New England does so well. Slightly cooler mornings, a different quality to the sunlight, the first hints of color in the occasional maple leaf. I found myself settling into a rhythm that felt both novel and deeply right, as if I'd finally found the life I was meant to live all along. My piano students at the community center ranged from 7 to 16 each, bringing their own challenges and joys. Some had natural talent that needed only gentle guidance. Others struggled with basics, but brought such determination that teaching them became a special pleasure. Most rewarding were the scholarship students, children who would never have had access to music lessons without the program I'd established. The Community Foundation Board welcomed me warmly, particularly after I demonstrated that I wanted to contribute more than just financial support. My suggestions about expanding the food security program to include cooking classes for families were met with enthusiasm and practical help in implementation. In the spaces between these new commitments, I continued making Ocean Glass truly mine. I hired local craftspeople to convert the cottage at the edge of the property into a proper music studio with excellent acoustics and room for a second piano. I worked with a landscaper to restore the gardens, maintaining their slightly wild character while making them more accessible. Through it all, my family maintained a strange, distant orbit, not quite absent, but not fully present either. Mia called weekly with carefully casual conversations that inevitably circled back to questions about family assets and estate planning. James sent formal emails outlining investment opportunities he thought might interest me. Daniel forwarded listings of luxury properties, suggesting I might want to diversify my real estate portfolio. Only Sophie maintained genuine contact, texting me regularly with updates about school, her piano practice, and her ongoing campaign to convince her parents to let her visit before the holidays. "Dad says we're all coming for Thanksgiving," she wrote in mid-September. "But that's forever from now. Can't I just come for a weekend?" I'd smiled at her persistence. "Ask your parents. You're always welcome here, but I won't go around them." "Ugh, that means no," came her immediate response. "They're still weird about everything." I wasn't surprised. The initial shock of my inheritance revelation had settled into a simmering resentment on my children's part, not openly hostile, but a palpable sense that I had somehow betrayed them by claiming independence. Our interactions remained civil, but carried an undercurrent of unresolved tension. On a crisp Saturday morning in late September, I was in the music studio reviewing lesson plans when I heard the sound of a car coming up the drive. I wasn't expecting visitors, but Grace from the bakery occasionally dropped off treats when she had extras, so I thought little of it as I made my way to the main house. The silver Mercedes parked in front of my porch was definitely not Grace's practical Subaru. Richard Jackson, my ex-husband of 13 years, stood examining my hydrangea bushes with the same critical eye he'd once applied to my housekeeping. At 68, he remained handsome in that polished corporate way, silver hair expertly cut, casual clothes that probably cost more than most people's formal wear, the confident posture of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. "Deborah," he greeted me as I stepped onto the porch. "Magnificent property you have here." "Richard," I replied, making no move to embrace him or invite him inside. "This is unexpected." He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I probably should have called first." "Yes, you should have," I agreed mildly. "What brings you to Seacliff? Can't a man visit his ex-wife without an agenda?" He attempted a charming smile that once would have melted my defenses. "You've never done anything without an agenda in the 40 years I've known you," I observed. "So, no, I don't think you can." He laughed, a genuine sound that briefly reminded me of our early years together, before ambition and status became his primary concerns. Still direct as ever, I've always appreciated that about you. "Richard," I sighed, "it's a beautiful day, and I have lesson plans to complete. Why are you here? He gestured to the porch swing. Could we sit? It's been a long drive from Boston. I hesitated, then nodded, settling into one end of the swing while he took the other. The polite distance between us spoke volumes about our relationship. Once intimate partners, now careful acquaintances, bound only by shared history and adult children. Mia and James are concerned about you, he began. Are they, how touching, concerned enough to send their father to check on me rather than visiting themselves? They're giving you space, he said diplomatically. They thought you might be more receptive to me since I'm not directly involved in the inheritance situation. Not directly involved, I repeated. Just serving as their emissary. Richard had the decency to look uncomfortable. Deborah, they're worried. This behavior buying an enormous house, cutting them out of financial decisions that could affect their children's futures. It's not like you. That's the second time I've heard that phrase recently, I mused. Not like you. It's interesting how people think they know who you are based on who you've been allowed to be. Philosophical musings aside, he pressed on. There are practical matters to consider. The children feel blindsided. They believed your uncle's estate would naturally benefit the entire family. Why would they believe that? I asked genuinely. Harold wasn't related to them. He barely knew them. The few times they visited while I was caring for him, they made it abundantly clear they found him tiresome and his home depressing. Richard shifted uncomfortably. That may be true, but it is true, I interrupted. Just as it's true that they've forgotten my birthday for 5 consecutive years. Just as it's true that neither of them bothered to check on me regularly after my parents died, despite knowing how draining those years of caregiving had been. I gazed out at the ocean, gathering my thoughts. I'm not punishing them, Richard. I'm simply no longer arranging my life around their convenience and expectations. They miss you, he said quietly. In their own way. Do they? Or do they miss what I represented: unconditional support, financial backup, free childcare, the comfortable certainty that Mom would always be there when needed and conveniently invisible when not? Richard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from diplomatic to something more genuine. I wasn't a good husband to you, Deborah. The unexpected admission caught me off guard. No, you weren't. I left when you needed support most, he continued. I resented your parents for needing care and you for providing it. I was selfish. Yes, I agreed simply. You were... His lips quirked in a half-smile. Most ex-wives would offer some comforting protest at this point. I'm not most ex-wives, I replied. And we both know it's true. You wanted the life you'd planned. Executive track, country club memberships, vacation homes. My parents' illnesses derailed that plan. So you found someone who could better accommodate your ambitions. Cynthia and I divorced last year, he said abruptly. Did the children tell you? They didn't. I was surprised both by the news and by the fact that neither Mia nor James had mentioned it. I'm sorry to hear that. He waved away my sympathy. It was amicable. We simply wanted different things, ultimately. I couldn't help but note the irony. Just like us. Not quite like us, he said quietly. Cynthia and I grew apart. You and I left. There's a difference. The simple acknowledgement of responsibility, something he'd never offered during our divorce or the years after, settled between us like an unexpected gift. Not one that changed anything, but one I could nevertheless appreciate. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. He nodded, then glanced at his watch. I should get going. I have a dinner in Boston. Of course, I stood, relieved that the conversation was ending before it could veer into more complicated territory. As we walked to his car, Richard paused. For what it's worth, Deborah, this place suits you. You seem at peace. I am, I confirmed. More than I've been in decades. Good. He opened his car door, then hesitated. The children are still coming for Thanksgiving. They've mentioned it. In passing, I acknowledged. Nothing definite. They'll come, he said with certainty. They need to see for themselves that you're all right, that this change is real. As his car disappeared down the driveway, I found myself pondering his words. Was that what this was about? Beneath the inheritance concerns and wounded entitlement were my children, in their own way, worried about me, struggling to reconcile the accommodating mother they'd known with this new boundary-establishing woman, perhaps. Or perhaps Richard was simply doing what he'd always done, smoothing over difficult truths with comforting narratives. Either way, it changed nothing about my path forward. If my family wanted to be part of my new life, they would need to accept it on its own terms, not as an inconvenient deviation to be corrected, but as the authentic expression of who I was, finally allowing myself to become. I returned to the music studio, to my lesson plans, and the satisfaction of work I'd chosen freely. The unopened door of Thanksgiving lay ahead, but I would cross that threshold when the time came, standing firmly in my own truth. October painted Seacliff in flaming colors, transforming my property into a canvas of russets, golds, and deep crimsons. I spent hours walking the grounds, collecting particularly beautiful leaves that I pressed between the pages of heavy books. A childhood habit rediscovered in my new freedom. My days developed a satisfying rhythm. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons were devoted to piano lessons at the community center. Tuesday evenings, I attended the foundation board meetings where I'd become an active voice in developing new programs. The remaining hours I filled with my own pursuits, playing piano, reading books I'd long postponed, exploring my new community, and cultivating friendships with neighbors and local shopkeepers. I'd begun hosting small gatherings, nothing elaborate, just simple dinners for people I genuinely enjoyed. Grace from the bakery became a regular visitor, along with Diane from the community center and Paul from the foundation. We were all of similar age, all with rich life experiences behind us, all finding new purpose in this chapter of our lives. "I never would have pegged you for a natural hostess," Grace remarked one evening as we sat on the porch after dinner, wrapped in light blankets against the autumn chill, watching the moonlight on the water. "You seemed so self-contained when you first arrived." "Hosting was something I did out of obligation, not pleasure," I admitted. "Family holidays, my husband's business dinners, events where I was expected to create the perfect backdrop for everyone else's enjoyment." "And now?" Paul asked, swirling the last of his wine in his glass. I considered the question. "Now I invite people I want to see, serve food I enjoy preparing, and create an atmosphere that feels genuine. It's a world of difference." As Halloween approached, Sophie's texts grew increasingly frustrated. "Dad says we're definitely coming for Thanksgiving, but won't even consider letting me visit before then. So unfair." I sympathized with her impatience, but respected my son's boundaries. Strained as our relationship was, undermining his parental authority would only damage things further. Instead, I channeled my grandmother energy into sending Sophie a care package of homemade cookies, sheet music for a piece she was struggling with, and a small watercolor I'd painted of the view from what would be her guest room. "OMG, Grandma, you paint too," came her delighted response. "This is beautiful. Can you teach me when I visit?" Her enthusiasm warmed my heart, a bright spot amid the more complicated family dynamics simmering beneath the surface. Mia's weekly calls had grown increasingly focused on Thanksgiving plans, how many bedrooms were prepared, what menu I was considering, whether I'd be comfortable with them staying for the long weekend. "Actually," I said during one such conversation, "I've decided to host Thanksgiving at Ocean Glass this year, but as a day event, not an overnight stay." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "We've always done the full weekend," Mia finally said, her tone carefully controlled. "It's tradition." "Traditions can evolve," I replied calmly. "I'm happy to host a lovely Thanksgiving dinner, but I'm not ready for house guests yet." This was not entirely true. I had indeed prepared several guest rooms, including the one Sophie had been promised. But after careful consideration, I decided that diving directly into an extended family stay would be too much too soon. Better to ease into our new dynamic with a single day of togetherness before attempting a longer visit. "Is this because of the inheritance discussions?" Mia asked, an edge creeping into her voice. "Are you punishing us?" "Not at all," I assured her. "I'm simply establishing what works for me in my new home. You're welcome to book rooms at the Seacliff Inn if you'd like to make a weekend of it. It's quite lovely and only 5 minutes away. Mia's sigh carried years of frustrated expectations. Fine, I'll let everyone know. But Mom, at some point we need to move past this. Whatever this is. We're family. Yes, we are, I agreed. And part of being a healthy family is respecting each other's boundaries. As October gave way to November, I found myself genuinely looking forward to Thanksgiving. Not with the anxious preparation of previous years when I'd exhausted myself creating picture-perfect holidays that no one fully appreciated, but with a calm anticipation of sharing my new home and life with my family on my own terms. I decided to blend tradition with innovation for the meal itself. The expected turkey, stuffing, and cranberry sauce would be accompanied by dishes reflecting my new coastal lifestyle, a seafood chowder to start. Locally harvested vegetables prepared simply to highlight their freshness. Artisanal breads from Grace's Bakery. The week before Thanksgiving, as I was finalizing my grocery list, I received an unexpected call from Olivia. "Deborah," she began without preamble, "I wanted to discuss the Thanksgiving photographs." "Photographs," I echoed, unsure what she meant. "Yes, for my social channels," she explained as if this should be obvious. "Your home is absolutely stunning, and a holiday gathering there is perfect content. I was thinking we could do a styled table setting before everyone arrives, and then some casual family shots during dinner, followed by—" "I'm sorry, Olivia," I interrupted gently. "I won't be allowing any social media photography during Thanksgiving." "What?" Her shock seemed genuine. "But this is a huge opportunity. My followers would love an authentic family holiday in a gorgeous setting. It could really boost my lifestyle content metrics." "I understand that's important for your work," I acknowledged. "But Thanksgiving at my home isn't a professional opportunity. It's a private family gathering." "But this isn't negotiable," I said firmly. "You're welcome to take personal photos for family albums, of course, but nothing for public consumption." After a moment of stunned silence, she recovered her composure. "James said you've been different since the inheritance." I guess he was right. "Different isn't always bad, Olivia," I observed. "Sometimes it's just honest." When Thanksgiving Day arrived, I woke before dawn, not from the anxious energy that had characterized previous holidays, but from a quiet excitement. I made coffee and carried it to the porch, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic in a spectacular display of pinks and golds. "Thank you, Harold," I whispered to the brightening sky, "for everything." The kitchen gradually filled with delicious aromas as I worked through my carefully planned timeline. By noon, everything was either completed or at a stage where it could be easily finished after my family arrived. The dining room table was set simply but elegantly with linens, silver, and centerpieces of autumn foliage and candles. A fire crackled in the living room hearth, and classical music played softly throughout the house. When the doorbell rang at 2:00, I took a deep breath and smoothed down my new dress, a deep teal that complemented my silver-streaked hair and brought out the green in my eyes. No more beige holiday outfits designed to fade into the background. This was my home, and I would stand prominently within it. James and his family arrived first. Olivia looking slightly sulky but dressed impeccably, their 3 children polite but reserved, clearly having been prepped for the visit. Sophie broke protocol immediately, rushing forward to hug me tightly. "Grandma, your house is amazing. Can I see my room? Did you really paint that ocean view from there? Is that a real piano in the sunroom? Can I play it?" Her breathless enthusiasm brought genuine laughter from me for the first time that day. "Yes to all questions, but let's get everyone settled first." Mia and Daniel arrived moments later with their 2 teenagers, completing our gathering. As I welcomed them into my home, I observed the barely concealed assessment in their gazes, the mental calculations of property values, the surreptitious examination of furnishings and art, the silent comparison of my new life to their expectations. "Welcome to Ocean Glass," I said simply. "I'm so glad you could all be here today." And despite the complicated undercurrents, despite the adjustments still to be navigated, I found I genuinely meant it. They were my family. Flawed, sometimes selfish, often frustrating, but still connected to me by bonds of love and history that couldn't be easily severed. As we moved into the living room for pre-dinner drinks and appetizers, I caught Sophie's eye. She gave me a subtle thumbs up and mouthed, "You've got this, Grandma." From the most unexpected quarter, that small vote of confidence steadied me for whatever the day might bring. Yes, I did have this, not just the holiday, but this new life I was creating, one conscious choice at a time. "Before we begin dinner," I announced as everyone settled around the table, "I'd like to introduce a new tradition." I placed a crystal bowl in the center of the table alongside a small stack of note cards and pens. Throughout my life, I've often focused on what was missing rather than what was present. This year, I'm practicing active gratitude. James and Mia exchanged glances, clearly uncertain where this was heading. Their spouses maintained polite but distant expressions while the grandchildren displayed varying degrees of interest, from Sophie's eager attention to her 16-year-old cousin Jake's poorly concealed eye roll. "I'd like each of us to write something we're genuinely grateful for," I continued, undeterred by their reactions. "Not the obvious answers, but something specific and meaningful. We'll place them in this bowl, and after dinner, we'll read them aloud anonymously. So, feel free to be honest." "That's so Pinterest, Grandma," Jake muttered, though loud enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps," I acknowledged with a smile. "But I found that deliberate gratitude changes my perspective. I thought we might try it together." To my surprise, it was Daniel who spoke up in support. "I think it's a great idea. Deborah, we do something similar at our company retreats. Helps build team cohesion. Leave it to Daniel to frame family bonding in corporate terms, but I appreciated the support nonetheless." I distributed the cards and pens, then busied myself with bringing the first course to the table while everyone wrote. The seafood chowder was met with appreciative murmurs, temporarily displacing the awkwardness of the gratitude exercise. By the time we moved to the main course, the crystal bowl contained folded cards from everyone, and conversation had shifted to safer topics: the children's school activities, general news, harmless gossip about mutual acquaintances. The traditional Thanksgiving feast was enhanced by the spectacular ocean view from the dining room windows, late afternoon sunlight turning the Atlantic to molten gold. Even Olivia, still disappointed about the social media ban, couldn't help commenting on the breathtaking setting. "The light here is extraordinary," she said, momentarily forgetting her practiced poise. "I've never seen anything like it." "It changes constantly," I told her. "That's what I love most. The same view never looks exactly the same twice." "Have you done any more painting, Mom?" Mia asked, surprising me with the personal question. "James mentioned Dad said you'd taken it up." So, Richard had shared details of our conversation. "Interesting. Just small watercolors," I replied. "Nothing serious, but I enjoy it." "Grandma sent me one of the view from upstairs," Sophie chimed in. "It's really good." "I didn't know you painted," Mia said, a hint of accusation in her tone. "There are probably many things we don't know about each other," I replied mildly. "That's part of why I wanted us together today, to reconnect as the people we are now, not just the roles we've played for each other." A thoughtful silence followed this statement, broken by James raising his wine glass. "To reconnection, then," he offered, "and new beginnings." The toast felt like a small olive branch, which I gratefully accepted. "To new beginnings," as pumpkin and pecan pies were served alongside Grace's contribution of an apple cranberry tart that promptly stole the show. The conversation flowed more naturally than it had all day. The children, growing restless after the long meal, were excused to explore the house with strict instructions about respecting private spaces and fragile objects. "They'll head straight for the piano," James predicted as the younger contingent departed. "I'm counting on it," I replied. "Sophie's been practicing a piece she wants to play for everyone." With the children gone, the adult conversation inevitably circled back to more complicated territory. "So, Mom," Mia began, her tone carefully casual, "have you given any more thought to our discussion about family assets?" Daniel shot her a warning glance that I didn't miss. They'd clearly strategized beforehand about when and how to raise the subject. "I have," I said calmly, "and my position remains the same. The inheritance is mine to manage. I've established educational trusts for all 5 grandchildren. Beyond that, I'm focusing on using these resources in ways that bring meaning to my life and benefit the community." "What community?" James asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "You've been here all of 5 minutes. We're your actual community, your family." "Community takes many forms," I replied. "I've established a music scholarship program at the local center. I'm working with the Community Foundation on food security initiatives. I'm building connections with neighbors and local businesses." "That's all very philanthropic," Mia said. But you still believe you have some claim to these funds." I finished for her. The directness of my statement created a moment of uncomfortable silence. "Not a claim exactly," Daniel interjected smoothly. "More a family interest in generational wealth management." I couldn't help but smile at the euphemism. "Your transparency is refreshing, at least." Before the conversation could become more heated, the sound of piano music drifted from the sunroom. Sophie playing the Chopin nocturne I'd been helping her with via our long-distance lessons. The simple beauty of the piece created a natural pause in our discussion. "She's quite good," Olivia observed, sounding genuinely impressed. "She practices diligently," I agreed. "And she has natural sensitivity for the emotional content of the music, not just the technical elements." James's expression softened as he listened to his daughter play. "She gets that from you, Mom. I remember you playing that same piece when we were kids." The unexpected acknowledgement touched me. "She reminds me of myself at that age," I admitted, before I set aside serious music study to focus on teaching. "Why did you?" Mia asked, seeming genuinely curious. "Dad always said you were concert-level talented." The question surprised me, not because it was particularly insightful, but because it revealed an interest in my history that my children rarely demonstrated. "Life intervened," I said simply. "Marriage, children, your grandparents' illnesses, dreams shifted." "But now you're teaching again," James noted. "At the community center," I nodded, pleased that he'd retained this detail from our limited conversations. "Just part-time, but yes, it's deeply satisfying, especially working with children who wouldn't otherwise have access to music education." The piano music stopped, and Sophie called from the sunroom. "Is it time for the gratitude bowl yet?" The adults exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement that our more complicated discussions would need to wait. "Yes," I called back. "Bring everyone to the living room." We gathered around the fireplace, the younger children sprawling on the thick carpet while the adults and teens took the various sofas and chairs. The crystal bowl sat on the coffee table, containing our anonymous thoughts on gratitude. "Who wants to start?" I asked, offering the bowl to Sophie, who sat closest to me. She eagerly drew a card and read, "I am grateful for second chances and the wisdom to recognize them when they appear." She looked up. "That's beautiful. Whose is it?" "They're anonymous, remember?" I reminded her gently. One by one, we took turns drawing and reading cards. Some were predictably generic family and good health, while others were surprisingly specific. Jake read one that said, "I'm grateful for the ocean view that reminds me how small my problems really are," while James drew, "I'm grateful for Sophie's music that brings beauty into our busy lives." Mia's expression shifted noticeably when she read, "I'm grateful for boundaries that teach me what truly matters," casting a speculative glance in my direction. When my turn came, I drew a card that made me pause before reading it aloud. "I'm grateful for my grandmother's courage to finally live her own life, even when it's uncomfortable for the rest of us." Sophie's cheeks flushed pink, confirming what I'd already suspected about the card's author. I reached over to squeeze her hand, a silent thank you for her perceptive support. The final card, read by Daniel, stated simply, "I'm grateful for this house and what it represents, not luxury or status, but the freedom to choose one's own path regardless of age." As we sat in the gentle aftermath of this exercise, the firelight casting warm shadows across our faces, I sensed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The gratitude bowl hadn't magically resolved our differences or healed decades of misalignment, but it had created a moment of genuine reflection, a brief window where we saw each other not just as the roles we occupied in each other's lives, but as individuals with our own perspectives, needs, and gratitudes. "Thank you all for indulging me in this new tradition," I said softly. "It means more than you know." James caught my eye across the room, his expression thoughtful. Thank you for hosting us. Mom, for sharing your new home and your new self with us. It's an adjustment, but he hesitated, then finished. But I think it might be a good one for all of us. It wasn't a complete resolution or a perfect reconciliation, but as olive branches went, it felt like a promising start. December arrived with a crystalline beauty particular to New England coastal winters. Bright, clear days when the ocean seemed to stretch endlessly beneath vast blue skies, interspersed with dramatic storms that sent waves crashing against the shore in magnificent displays of nature's power. Thanksgiving had marked a subtle but significant turning point in my relationship with my family. The changes were small but noticeable. Mia's weekly calls now included genuine questions about my activities beyond perfunctory checks on my well-being. James sent articles about music education initiatives rather than investment opportunities. Even Olivia had shifted her approach, asking if she might photograph the gardens in spring. Just for family albums, I promise. Most meaningful was my strengthening bond with Sophie, who had indeed been granted permission to visit for a weekend in early December. Dad says it's my early Christmas present, she texted, her excitement palpable even through the screen. 3 whole days with just us. I spent the week before her arrival preparing the promised guest room, adding thoughtful touches I knew she'd appreciate. A small writing desk by the window overlooking the ocean. A bookshelf filled with titles I'd loved at her age. A comfortable window seat perfect for reading or daydreaming. When James dropped her off on Friday afternoon, I was struck by the change in his demeanor. Gone was the calculating assessment of my property. In its place was a more genuine interest in my settling-in process. The place looks even better than at Thanksgiving, he observed as he helped carry Sophie's bags inside. You've really made it your own. I'm getting there, I agreed. It's a process. Dad, can I show you my room before you go? Sophie asked, practically bouncing with anticipation. Grandma sent me pictures, but I want you to see it in person. James allowed himself to be dragged upstairs, where Sophie's delighted exclamations echoed down the hallway. When they returned, I was surprised to see something like emotion in my son's usually composed expression. That room, he said quietly, while Sophie explored the sunroom. It's exactly what she would have designed for herself if she could. How did you know? I pay attention, I replied simply. He nodded, a flicker of something recognition regret crossing his face. I should get going. Traffic back to Boston will be terrible. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for doing this for her. She needs different influences in her life than just her mother and me. It was perhaps the most self-aware statement I'd ever heard from my son, an acknowledgement that his parenting, while well-intentioned, might not provide everything his daughter needed. She's a remarkable young woman, I told him. You and Olivia have done well with her. His smile was genuine, if somewhat rueful. She's her own person more and more every day. Reminds me of someone else I know. After he left, Sophie and I settled into a comfortable rhythm that felt both novel and familiar, like the rediscovery of a natural connection that had been obscured but never fully lost. We baked Christmas cookies using my mother's recipes. We practiced piano duets in the sunroom. We walked the winter beach collecting shells and sea glass, our conversations flowing easily between her school experiences, my new community involvements, and the creative pursuits we both enjoyed. On Saturday evening, as we sat by the fire with mugs of hot chocolate, Sophie broached the subject that had clearly been on her mind. Grandma, can I ask you something personal? Of course, I replied, curious about what she considered personal in her 14-year-old worldview. Why did you wait so long? She tucked her feet beneath her on the sofa, her expression earnest. To stand up for yourself. I mean, with Dad and Aunt Mia? With all of us. The directness of her question caught me off guard. I took a moment to consider my answer, wanting to be honest without burdening her with family complexities beyond her years. I think I believed that self-sacrifice was the same as love, I said finally. That putting everyone else's needs before my own was what good mothers, good daughters, good people did. It took me a long time to realize that true love, for others and for yourself, requires balance. She nodded thoughtfully. Dad says you've changed, but I don't think that's right. I think maybe you were always like this inside. But nobody was paying attention. Her insight, so clear, so unencumbered by adult rationalizations, left me momentarily speechless. That's remarkably perceptive, I managed finally. She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I watch people and I listen even when adults think I'm not. A valuable skill, I observed. One that will serve you well in life. Is that why Uncle Harold left you his money? She asked. Because he saw the real you when nobody else did. I think so, I acknowledged. He used to tell me I had fire inside that needed oxygen to burn properly. I didn't really understand what he meant until this past year. I like this you, Sophie said decisively. The you with oxygen. I laughed at her phrasing, but the sentiment touched me deeply. I like her too. I'm still getting to know her in many ways. On Sunday morning, our final day together, I presented Sophie with a small wrapped package. An early Christmas gift, I explained. Something to take home with you. She opened it carefully to reveal a handcrafted journal bound in soft leather, the color of the sea. The first page held an inscription in my handwriting. For Sophie, who sees clearly, may this book hold your observations, your questions, your unique perspective on the world, with love and admiration. Grandma D, it's beautiful, she whispered, running her fingers over the cover. Thank you. I thought you might use it for writing or sketching or simply recording your thoughts, I said. Creative minds need outlets. She hugged the journal to her chest. I'll use it every day. When James arrived that afternoon to take her home, Sophie's goodbye hug was fierce and lingering. I'm coming back for February break, she informed me, not asking but stating. Dad already said I could. I raised an eyebrow at James, who nodded confirmation. We thought it might become a regular thing, he said, if that works for you. More than works, I assured them both. It would be a joy. After they departed, I wandered through the quiet house, straightening Sophie's room but leaving traces of her visit intact. The subtle impression on the window seat cushion, the book she'd been reading left on the nightstand, the faint scent of the strawberry shampoo she favored lingering in the adjoining bathroom. I had spent decades maintaining perfectly ordered spaces, erasing all evidence of messiness or spontaneity. Now I found comfort in these small signs of life and connection, these gentle reminders that my home was becoming not just a beautiful showcase, but a lived-in sanctuary where real relationships could flourish. As evening approached, I moved to the sunroom where the last light of the December day cast long shadows across the floor. Sitting at the piano, I began to play. Not a structured practice session or a piece selected to please others, but simply following my own musical instincts, allowing my fingers to express what my heart was feeling. Joy, gratitude, peace, and something else that had been absent for too long anticipation for what might come next. My phone chimed with a text from Patricia. Community Foundation holiday party tomorrow night. Need a ride? I smiled as I typed my response. I'll drive. Thinking of inviting Grace and Diane, too, making it a girls' night. The ease with which I now made such arrangements, casually organizing social outings, offering my home and time without calculation or obligation, still felt novel, but increasingly natural. This was what freedom looked like in practice. Not selfishness or isolation, but the ability to choose connection on authentic terms. As darkness settled over Ocean Glass, I moved through the rooms, lighting lamps against the gathering night. In each space, I had created something that reflected my true self, not the accommodating caretaker I'd been for decades, but the woman I might have become all along had circumstances been different, the woman I was becoming now, regardless. Standing at the living room window, watching moonlight silver the winter waves, I whispered a silent message to Harold wherever he might be. I finally understand what you meant about the fire inside. Thank you for the oxygen. The inheritance had provided the means for this transformation, certainly, but the true gift hadn't been the money. It had been the mirror Harold held up, showing me who I could be if I finally found the courage to claim my own life. At 65, most people were thinking about winding down, settling in, accepting limitations. I found myself doing the opposite, expanding, exploring, embracing possibilities. It wasn't about the house, magnificent as it was. It wasn't about the financial security, welcome as that felt. It was about the simple, revolutionary act of putting myself at the center of my own story after decades of orbiting everyone else's needs. My birthday would come again in July, for the first time in years. I found myself looking forward to it, not with dread or resignation, but with genuine anticipation. Whatever celebration I planned, whatever people I included, it would be my choice, my joy, my day. And this time, I knew with absolute certainty it wouldn't be forgotten. The winter months passed with a quiet rhythm I came to cherish. My music students at the community center continued to progress, bringing me fresh satisfaction with each lesson. The scholarship program expanded as word spread, bringing in children whose eyes widened with wonder the first time they pressed a piano key and heard a note respond to their touch. My work with the Community Foundation deepened as well. The cooking classes I'd proposed for food-insecure families had proven successful beyond our expectations, teaching practical skills while building community connections. Paul had approached me about expanding the program to include nutrition education and budgeting workshops. "We need someone to coordinate the expanded program," he'd said during one of our board meetings. "Someone with organizational skills and genuine compassion." The others had turned to me expectantly, and I found myself accepting a formal role with the foundation part-time, but significant. Another piece of my new identity taking shape. My relationship with my children continued its gradual thaw. James called more regularly now, our conversations less guarded, more genuine. Mia had suggested a mother-daughter weekend in the spring. Just the two of us, to really talk, in February, as promised. Sophie returned for her school break. She arrived with twice the luggage she'd brought in December, including an easel and painting supplies. "You said you'd teach me," she reminded me as James unloaded the car. "I want to try watercolors like yours." Her 5-day visit became a creative immersion. We set up our easels in the sunroom, capturing the winter sea in all its moods, steely gray under cloudy skies, sparkling sapphire on clear days, burnished gold at sunset. I taught her the techniques I'd been teaching myself: how to layer washes, how to let the water do part of the work, how to capture light and movement with suggestion rather than detail. "You're a natural teacher," James observed on the 3rd day, when he dropped by with additional art supplies Sophie had requested. He watched as I demonstrated a wet-on-wet technique for creating soft cloud effects. "It's my calling," I said simply. "Always has been." "I never really understood that before," he admitted. "Teaching piano always seemed like something you did because it was convenient, not because it was your passion." Perhaps I didn't express that passion clearly enough, I reflected. Or perhaps you weren't in a place to see it. We all have our blind spots when it comes to the people closest to us. He nodded, watching his daughter paint with fierce concentration. "I'm starting to see mine more clearly these days." On Sophie's last evening, we held an impromptu art show for Grace, Diane, and Paul, displaying our week's work in the dining room. Sophie's paintings showed remarkable promise, capturing emotional qualities beyond her years. "These are extraordinary," Paul said, studying a seascape where Sophie had captured the lonely beauty of a winter beach. "You have your grandmother's eye for the essence of things." "She's taught me so much," Sophie beamed. "Not just about painting, but about really seeing." After our guests departed, Sophie and I sat on the window seat in her room, watching the stars emerge over the ocean. "I wish I didn't have to leave tomorrow," she sighed. "This place feels more like home than our house in Boston sometimes." "That's because you're free to be yourself here," I told her. "No expectations except your own." "Dad's different when he visits here," she observed. "Less uptight. Mom, too, even though she tries to hide it." "Your parents are good people carrying heavy expectations," I said carefully. "Sometimes those expectations make it hard to hear your own voice." "Like you before Uncle Harold died." "Very much like that," I agreed. "But it's never too late to start listening to yourself. That's something I hope you learn much earlier than I did." She leaned her head against my shoulder. I'm going to miss you so much. I'll be right here, I assured her. And you're welcome anytime. This room is yours whenever you want it. When James came to collect her the next morning, Sophie presented him with one of her paintings, a sunrise over the ocean, light breaking through clouds. For your office, Dad, she said, so you can have a piece of ocean glass with you every day. The look on my son's face as he carefully accepted the gift told me more than any words could have. Something was healing in our fractured family, slowly but surely, like sea glass being transformed by time and tide. March arrived with its characteristic indecision, alternating between winter's last gasps and spring's tentative advances. I found myself increasingly involved in community life, no longer the newcomer, but a recognized presence in Seacliff. My regular table at Grace's Bakery became a place where people stopped to chat, sharing town news or seeking advice about the Foundation's programs. Diane had expanded my role at the community center to include organizing small recitals for the students, giving them performance experience in a supportive environment. You've brought new life to this place, she told me after a particularly successful student showcase. These children are blossoming under your guidance. They're teaching me as much as I'm teaching them, I replied, watching as proud parents congratulated their young musicians. Each one brings something unique to the music. One afternoon in late March, as I was leaving the community center, I ran into Paul carrying a stack of flyers. Perfect timing, he said, handing me one. The town council approved our proposal for the summer arts program. We're looking for instructors now. I scanned the flyer, which outlined an ambitious program of music, visual arts, and theater classes for local children during the summer months. The foundation would subsidize costs for low-income families, making the program accessible to all. This is wonderful, I said. Exactly what this community needs. We're hoping you'll head the music component, Paul said. Your students' recital last week convinced the last holdouts on the council. The offer surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. I'd been gradually taking on more responsibilities with the foundation, proving my commitment through consistent involvement rather than just financial support. I'd be honored, I told him, but it would mean postponing my trip to visit my daughter in Chicago. Family comes first, Paul said immediately. We can work around your schedule. No, I said thoughtfully. That's the old thinking. Family is important, but it's not the only thing that matters. Mia and I can reschedule. This program is too important to delay. The decision felt significant not because I was dismissing my family, but because I was weighing all my commitments equally, without automatically prioritizing my children's convenience. It was another small step in my ongoing transformation. That evening, I called Mia to discuss rescheduling our planned visit. I braced myself for disappointment or frustration, but her reaction surprised me. Actually, Mom, that timing works better for me too, she admitted. I just didn't want to say anything because I know we'd planned this months ago. There's a major project at work that's been moved up, and I was going to be distracted during your visit. We're both allowed to have full lives, I told her. That's something I'm learning rather late. You know, she said after a pause, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at Thanksgiving. About us not calling just to check on you. Only when we needed something. You were right, and I'm sorry. The straightforward apology caught me off guard. Thank you for saying that. I'm trying to do better, she continued, to see you as a person, not just as Mom who's always there when needed. That means more than you know, I told her, emotion thickening my voice. After we hung up, I sat on the porch swing despite the March chill, wrapped in a blanket and my thoughts. These conversations with my children halting, sometimes awkward, but increasingly honest, were healing something I hadn't fully realized was broken. Not just our relationships with each other, but my relationship with myself. For decades, I'd defined my worth through their need for me. Now, paradoxically, as I created a life independent from that need, we were finding new ways to connect adult to adult, person to person that felt more authentic than before, and April arrived with a riot of color as the gardens at Ocean Glass burst into bloom. The previous owners had planted extensively, and now I reaped the rewards as daffodils, tulips, and hyacinths created carpets of color across the grounds. One bright Saturday, I hosted a garden party for my growing circle of local friends. Grace brought freshly baked bread. Diane arranged flowers from my garden into stunning centerpieces, and Paul grilled seafood on the patio. Several of my piano students' parents joined us, along with neighbors I'd gotten to know over the months. As I moved among my guests, refilling glasses and ensuring everyone was comfortable, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me, not because of any dramatic physical change, but because of the ease in her movements, the animation in her expression, the sense of belonging in her own skin. That woman was hosting not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to share her home and her joy. She was engaging not from a position of anxious accommodation, but from confident generosity. She was, I realized with a start, happy in a way I'd forgotten was possible. "Penny for your thoughts," Grace said, joining me at the window. "You're looking awfully contemplative for someone throwing such a lovely party." "I was just thinking about transformation," I told her. "How sometimes we become who we were always meant to be, just decades later than planned." She laughed, linking her arm through mine. "Better late than never, my dear. Now come tell Paul his lobster is about to be cremated. He's too busy pontificating about wine pairings to notice the smoke." As I moved back into the flow of the gathering, I felt a deep gratitude wash over me. For Harold's gift, yes, but more importantly for the courage it had given me to reinvent myself. To discover that at 65 life wasn't ending, but expanding in directions I'd never dared to imagine. May brought a mother-daughter weekend with Mia, who arrived without an agenda or portfolio, just a genuine desire to reconnect. We walked the beach, cooked together, and sat up late talking about things we'd never discussed before: my dreams as a young woman, her struggles balancing career and motherhood, the complex legacy of expectations we inherit and pass on. "I think I've been angry with you," she confessed one evening as we sat on the porch. "Not for anything you did, but because you seemed to accept limitations I was fighting against in my own life. When you suddenly refused to be limited anymore. It forced me to look at my own choices. We all make compromises," I said. "The important thing is knowing which ones honor your true self and which ones erase it. I lost sight of that distinction for a long time. I'm not sure I've ever known it," she admitted. "I've been so busy proving myself at work, as a mother, as a wife, that I don't know who I am underneath all those roles." "That's a realization worth having at your age," I told her. It took me until my 60s. When she left on Sunday, our hug felt different, not the perfunctory embrace of obligation, but a genuine connection between two women beginning to see each other clearly. June brought James and his family for a long weekend. Olivia had warmed considerably since Thanksgiving, especially after seeing how her photography of the spring gardens at Ocean Glass had been received on her social channels. "Your home has become my most requested backdrop," she told me, only half joking. "My followers want a regular Life at Ocean Glass feature. As long as the family privacy we discussed is respected," I reminded her gently. "Absolutely," she agreed. "I've learned that some things are more valuable kept private." Coming from Olivia, whose life had been thoroughly documented online for years, this represented significant growth. Sophie, of course, was in her element, racing between the piano, the art studio, and the beach with boundless energy. She'd brought a friend this time, a quiet, artistic girl named Zoe, who shared her interest in music and painting. Watching them explore the grounds, heads bent together in deep conversation, I was reminded of myself at that age, serious, observant, hungry for beauty in all its forms. But unlike me, Sophie was growing up with permission to pursue her passions, with adults who recognized and nurtured her gifts. That alone made every boundary I'd established worth the initial discomfort. On their last evening, James approached me as I stood watching the sunset from the porch. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I've been thinking about it for months, and it's time I said it directly. I'm sorry for how we reacted to your inheritance, for assuming we had some claim to it, for not seeing how much you deserved something that was solely yours after all you've given." The simple, straightforward apology moved me deeply. Thank you, James. That means a great deal. I also want to thank you, he continued, for being patient with us while we adjusted, for not shutting us out even when we gave you every reason to. You're my children, I said simply. That doesn't change, even as everything else does. Dad was right, he said, smiling slightly. This place suits you. This life suits you. I've never seen you so radiant. The word caught me by surprise. Radiant. Not a term anyone had ever applied to sensible, self-effacing Deborah Taylor, but looking at my reflection in the darkening window, I could see what he meant. There was a glow about me that came from within, from the joy of finally living authentically. As July approached, bringing my 66th birthday with it, I began planning a celebration unlike any I'd ever allowed myself before. Not an elaborate party seeking others' approval, but a gathering that truly reflected my new life and connections. I invited my children and grandchildren, of course, but also my Seacliff friends, my piano students and their families, my colleagues from the Community Foundation. I hired a local jazz quartet, arranged for catering for my favorite restaurants, and set up a tent on the lawn overlooking the ocean. The day before my birthday, I received an unexpected delivery, a large package from Richard. Inside was a beautiful wooden music stand, hand-carved with intricate patterns of waves and shells. The card read simply, "For the musician you've always been. Happy birthday. Deborah. May this year bring more of your true self into the world. Richard." The thoughtful gift brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not from lingering attachment, but from the recognition it represented. After all these years, he had finally seen me. On the morning of my birthday, I woke before dawn and made my way to the beach. As the first light brightened the horizon, I stood at the water's edge, toes sinking into cool sand, and reflected on the extraordinary year that had passed. I'd lost and found myself. I'd surrendered old patterns and discovered new possibilities. I'd learned that endings can be beginnings if we have the courage to walk through the door that opens before us. As the sun broke free of the horizon, painting the sky and sea in radiant gold, I whispered a promise to myself, to never again mistake self-erasure for love, to honor the fire inside that Harold had recognized, to remember that it's never too late to become who you might have been. Later that day, as ocean glass filled with laughter and music, as my grandchildren raced across the lawn and my friends raised glasses in celebration, as my children watched me with new understanding in their eyes, I felt Harold's presence beside me. "Happy birthday, Deborah," I could almost hear him say. "Finally, a celebration worthy of you." What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below.